rejecting masculinist conceptions of justice, the feminist tradition and the ethics of care in particular are not rejecting the idea of justice and the idea that an ethical person should be concerned with justice. They just don't think of justice primarily in terms of impartiality or fairness. They have different emphases. So here are examples of some things that they're worried about. The first is the fact that caring tasks seem to be distributed very unevenly in our society. And so it falls to women much more than to men to care for children. It falls to women much more than men to work in daycare centers, hospitals, nursing homes. It's also the case that there's an exploitation of the unpaid labor of women frequently because of those child care and elder care and housekeeping tasks. And those, of course, those tasks mean that women are less able to engage in paid work. And as I said last time, it may feel like these concerns are the concerns of a prior generation. But studies show that, in fact, they are still matters of concern today, even if we've made a considerable amount of progress on them. Another one of the concerns of the ethics of care is with the low pay of most minority workers. That is, the low pay of most workers who are engaged in care. So if you look at, you have an affluent household that depends upon a housekeeper, a nanny for the children, maybe a live-in nurse for the elderly parent, the person who works in a daycare center, the person who works in one of the lower nursing roles or in a nursing home for the elderly or the disabled. All of them are very low paid, and they are predominantly minority workers, workers of color. And so the fact that we undervalue the work of care, it's not just that we don't care enough about care, it's also that the dollar value we place on care is disproportionately small. So the person who makes or distributes alcohol, for instance, makes a great deal more money than the person who cares for the child as a nanny in a wealthy household. And so the ethics of care wants to raise the question whether that is a good and a just society in which the most important activities in the society, the most important work in the society, the work of care, actually has essentially the lowest wage, is really the minimum wage worker is someone who's doing the most important work in our society. I mean, it is also the case if you look at minimum wage workers in the food industry or in the construction industry, or people who are making our clothing. So if we think about food, clothing, and shelter as essential needs, the people who are providing those needs are the people we're paying the least of all in our society. So Held wants to emphasize that there can be no justice without care, because without care, no child would survive, and there would be no individuals with rights, no autonomous individuals, or as she says, no persons to respect without care. And that's clearly a dig at Kant and Kant's formula of persons. So Held's claim is that justice cannot give us, traditional justice can't give us a morality that is suitable for answering all moral questions. And we need to add to that, not replace it with an ethics of care, but add an ethics of care to it. So along with this comes the claim that society should be reorganized in such a way as to promote care instead of marginalizing it. One of the things that Held wants us to see is that the way we spend money, it says something about our values, right? So where do we spend money? We spend money on military strength, on government, on law, on the financial sector, all of which are about power, wealth, and competition, right? And Held wants to say, and there's less money spent on everything to do with care, whether you're talking about health care or food service or the care for children, for instance, education, right? So Held wants to say we should turn the expenditure of money, time, energy, and attention of our society upside down so that we have an emphasis on peace, an emphasis on protection of the environment, an emphasis on care, education, and on meeting the needs of all. And of course, Held is writing long before the current Black Lives Matter protests, but she makes the point that a society that emphasized caring over military strength, government, law, and the financial sector would be a society that would drastically reduce the need for laws and the police. So she's talking about the need for what she calls a profound restructuring of society. Next, Held wants to contrast the ethics of care with virtue theory. So I said when I was introducing the ethics of care that Held does resonate somewhat with Aristotle's moral theory called virtue theory. Sometimes the ethics of care is seen by other philosophers as incorporated in the ethics of care, but Held wants to distinguish the two. So one of the differences that Held wants to emphasize between the ethics of care and Aristotle's virtue ethics is that the ethics of care wants to promote a post-patriarchal society, a society where men are not in charge by default. And of course, Athens, as I told you about when I was introducing Aristotle a number of videos ago, Athens was the patriarchal society par excellence. Another difference is that virtue ethics focuses on the character of individuals, whereas the ethics of care wants to focus on caring relations. So Held wants to give relationships primacy over individuals. She wants to talk about social relations and the social practices that maintain them, rather than to have this razor-sharp focus on the individual within the context. She wants to talk about the whole social fabric within which the individual functions. One similarity, you may not like it very much, between the ethics of care and virtue ethics, it's something that people get frustrated with in the case of both. Neither one of them gives any easy answers, right? They show us many different dimensions of ethical life that we have to take into consideration in order to live well and to act well. But if you think about Aristotle's virtue of prudence or practical wisdom, right, you'll see how much. It's like Tony's recipes, my mother-in-law's recipes. They depend upon the judgment of the individual to say what is the prudent thing in the case of virtue ethics, or what is the caring thing to do in this particular relationship.